The reason marijuana was made illegal, most shockingly, but not quite, you can understand that. In the 1920s, black people and white people met together for the first time in the same building, in jazz clubs. White women were permitted to go to a jazz club and see black musicians. And you know what it's like with women. All you need is some guy with a bongo over there and there'll be 20 women swaying around in 5 minutes, right? The women just intuitively and by organically love music and love a beat. And when these handsome jazz musicians in their nice suits came into these northern cities, and I dare say into Canadian cities, and started playing jazz music, some of these white women fell in love with them. But the problem is, they smoked the joint, they had sex, they got pregnant, and oh my God, there would be nothing more sinful and shocking than a white woman pregnant with a black man's child in the 1920s and 30s. And so periodically in newspapers you'd see, you know, a woman was drugged, listening to voodoo music, raped, and then got pregnant. And that's why marijuana was made illegal, because they did not. American middle-class people were petrified at the thought of black people and white people commingling, having sex, smoking pot, playing music, getting along fine. That was too shocking, and that's why marijuana was made illegal in Canada. To actually keep black people out of the country, to keep Mexican people out of the country, just like opium was made illegal to deport the Chinese people. Marijuana laws were founded in racism, they're founded in bad science. There's never been a single regard for the health of Canadians involved in making marijuana illegal. So I must ask once again, and you must ask every politician you ever run into, what is the moral basis for making people who smoke marijuana persecuted? Why does the nation persecute us, and what benefit is it to Canada? How does any Canadian benefit?
It's 4:20.
It can't be.
Yep, it is.
All right, well that shows you I know how to speak a lot. It's quarter after.
No, it's 4:20.
Somebody's just anxious. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. We're going to light this up, and I want to make sure I get a commitment from you. Are you going to do something about that? This, when the government tries to recriminalize it, because you bet they're coming back and they're going to pass a law that makes you pay fines, go to jail. You know, before I let me tell you that in their so-called decrim, they actually want to make it so that growers of pot who grow more than 50 plants are subject to a penalty up to 14 years in jail. Now let me just tell you, conspiracy to commit terrorism is a maximum of 10 years in jail. Now I know that maybe no judge is going to give people 14, but the message from Parliament is growing 50 plants of God's plants. And by the way, the Constitution, the Charter of Rights starts by saying we acknowledge the supremacy of God. And who but God would have put marijuana on this plant and created intelligent human beings to use it and to grow it everywhere on earth? Who but God could have possibly anticipated that? And we are told that the Charter of Rights is founded upon the supremacy of God. So by what right does man in Parliament have to tear that asunder? Man has no right. Government has no right. You have every right. There's only 3 things all human beings do, because some of us are blind, some people don't even have limbs. You sweat, you excrete really, and that can be taken a number of ways, but you excrete, you breathe, and you put things in your mouth. And when we criminalize people for putting things in their mouth like this, we are criminalizing hundreds of millions of people simultaneously around the world for doing something that all humans are here innately to do. To experiment with God's plants, God's herbs, God's gifts, and to find out if these things are good for you. So I just want to know, are you glad I came? Oh, yeah. Now they're going to try to, are you going to do something about it when they try and recriminalize? Can I hear a commitment that you're going to do something? Are you going to do something? Yeah. Well then, we'll think about that. Well, I like this. By the way, this is a combination of Marley's Collie, a beautiful Jamaican, and some deadly indica called, well, it's called fucking incredible, actually. There you go. And by the way, to freedom, to Canada, still, and you know what? I've been arrested 17 times, jailed 13 times for marijuana, and raided 5 times. The government has taken over $1 million of my assets, and I still think this is the greatest place on earth.
Oh, yeah.
Hell yeah, it is.
To freedom! To marijuana!
Next Mark.
We should do this more often!
Hell yeah.
Let's do it. Every Tuesday.
I'm going to the ball 6.
We got it, we got it.
Here you go. That's right, get those ladies first back there. Here's your lighter back, whoever that's from.
Thanks, Mark.
By the way, if anybody wants me to autograph their stuff, I brought a green pen for that very purpose. So. Yeah, sure, just... yeah, okay, get somebody to take it for me. Sorry. What's your name? And what's your name?
How about a couple? Thanks, man.
Just so you know, since I gave away High Times magazine and tried to get charged here in February 1992, 11 and a half years ago, 320,000 Canadians were convicted of marijuana offenses since I first did this. 600,000 Canadians were actually detained and arrested. So don't make it another 11 and a half years and 300,000 convictions. So if I don't want to come back here in 11 and a half years and do this again because marijuana's been made illegal. We've got to keep it legal. Now that marijuana's legal, smoke it everywhere. Grow pot everywhere. Grow as much pot as possible. Assert your rights. Go to the hippie cafe and support that place. Start making bongs. Start promoting our culture. It's legal. Get out there now. The hippie cafe?
Oxford and Quebec.
Oxford and Quebec. There you go. Okay, I didn't even know that. So Oxford. He's a plant doctor.
Oxford and Quebec, right above it, behind.
I have a question. Are you going to be in Amsterdam November 20th?
I never leave Canada. No, I'm quite convinced the USA would pick me up anywhere in the world. They would never let me go again, I assure you. I've sold more seeds to create more pot than the DEA and RCMP have destroyed in the same period of time. Yay. I mean, have you wondered? They destroy millions of... Is there any tobacco on that? Oh, okay. They destroy millions of plants, but there's always so much more. Have you sold more seeds? The government is more afraid of the truth than they are of any drug, let me assure you. The truth is the most dangerous weapon to a government. Drugs don't pose any threat. Unfortunately, most people who take most kinds of drugs don't vote. So they really don't care about you in a sense. But the truth that would motivate people and get them involved in this and fighting the system, they fear that. So when they banned this, they clearly knew if we stopped them from even communicating with each other, they can never organize, they can never feel like they're human beings. Remember, when you're alone as a pot smoker and you think that you can't tell anybody because they might rat you out, we all know the stories, right? Then they keep you in a constant state of fear and paranoia. And so that you can never really ever organize, you can never admit who you are. It's like if being gay were illegal and you could get arrested for being gay, nobody would ever be known to be gay, right? Because everybody would have to keep that as they'd have to. And imagine how you would meet. So in the same way as a pot person going to a pot cellar, it's like one big surreptitious meeting no one can know. If you live like that, that's psychologically shattered over time. No human should be in any way predisposed to have to hide who they are, as long as they're non-violent. But and we recognize that about people's religious beliefs and their ethnic beliefs and even their gender beliefs. We accept that it's not right to persecute people because they're homosexual or because they're Chinese or because they're Islamic, etc. But why? And we're still the great big, boogeyman that people feel that's all right with the system. 1 million people in 35 years, staggering numbers, and yet not a peep. There isn't a single member of Parliament in all the years I've ever seen that's ever asked the Attorney General that simple question. Why do we persecute the marijuana people? How has the nation benefited by 35 years of non-stop repression against a minority of 3 million Canadians that cut across every geographical, every age group, every economic group? Marijuana people are involved in every strata of society. And in fact, of course, Kim Campbell, a Prime Minister, smoked marijuana. Pierre Trudeau smoked marijuana. I know his son, Justin Trudeau, told me Dad was all in favor. So here we have 2 prime ministers, we've had premiers of provinces, half the members of parliament have smoked pot, including the justice minister. What hypocrisy when the majority of our leaders have smoked marijuana, none of them have suffered as a consequence of any legal prohibition that they want us to suffer for. It's still shocking. Don't let anybody tell you no one goes to jail. I've gone to jail 6 times on this tour alone for marijuana, and a number of times handcuffed and leg ironed. And then they tried to deny me bail, and four times. And you know what? You can meet people right up to the age of 65 who've got 1, 2, 3. Now I've got 22. All right, I'm not saying you should get that zealous, but so many people you meet have a conviction. They'll never be able to go to the United States again. What's that? And you know what? And they say it's the U.S. influence. It is the U.S. that keeps it illegal. But you know what? We got to think in a humanitarian way. We're going to save the Americans from their own evil government. If we make marijuana legal, I assure you, the Americans will have to make marijuana legal within 6 months to a year. They would have millions of them, 20 to 30 million Americans would come up and discover a way of life that's better than what they've been allowed to have. And they're going to want to go back. Why can't we have that? Canadians seem so happy and peaceful, and they're not obsessed with guns, and they're not paranoid, and they don't make enemies, and they have a safer society, a cleaner society, in every way superior. And then they could smoke our weed, and they could look around and maybe let go of that American kind of obsession they have about themselves and see that there are better ways, and they can vote that evil government out in the United States that's leading the most vicious of all the campaigns against the marijuana people, the United States government. And also in Malaysia last week, the government condemned to death a guy who sold 1 pound of marijuana, received a death sentence. In Thailand, the government's executed thousands of people in the last 5 months in a drug war. 3,500 people have been executed, including hundreds of marijuana sellers, right? Singapore has always had the death sentence. America has 150,000 people in jail at any one moment on marijuana, and many of them for 5, 10, 15 years. So there's a holocaust going on. So just because this is the only place in the world where marijuana is certifiably, absolutely not contestably legal right now in Ontario. Not even Amsterdam is like that. So we've come so far, but now you've got to keep it, because one example like Ontario, where marijuana is really legal and there'll be no body count, you see, nothing bad will happen, and that's what they've never allowed to experiment. You see, I often say, well, listen, if legalization doesn't work, just go back to the old way. You won't need to convince anybody if it doesn't work, but what's going to happen? Well, civilized things will happen immediately. All of a sudden, the price of pot goes down, everybody grows it in their backyard, you know, take it out of the house, everybody pressures off, you know, no more crime, corruption, no more organized crime, right? No kids, no filling the jails, billions of dollars saved. Not a bad thing in the bunch, right? Pot gets GST and GST. Everybody, you know, I'm not asking for special privilege. It's one of the bad things is we'll have to pay income tax, although I already pay a lot of income tax. But the rest of the people in the business will have to pay income tax. But see, we're only asking to be as equal as all other Canadians. We're not asking to be special. So we're willing to pay our share. We'll pay the income tax. We'll pay the GST. We'll pay the PSTs. Or as I would have to say in Halifax, the HST, the harmonized sales tax. We'll pay it all. It's a win-win for everybody. The biggest beneficiaries, I'm sorry, I was supposed to sign this. Who's this? Mike. She said, you know, if I had a chair, I'd listen to you. Well, you want protests at the courthouse? To the conclusion that prohibition is morally wrong, unworkable, accomplishes none of its objectives, is totally counterproductive, and it creates all the situations it alleges to address. So the Senate report makes great reading, as well as all these judicial decisions. And hey, well, you know, I even prefer another word that nobody uses, but we should. I think marijuana is good for everybody, but that doesn't make it medical. That makes it therapeutic. Remember, vitamin C is good for it. Vitamin C is good for it, but don't call it medical, because we don't identify it as the cure-all. We identify it as something we essentially need to stay healthy. And you know what you also notice? Nobody ever dies of cancer or respiratory disease from 25, 30, 40 years of smoke pot. Never see it. There's no coroner's reports around that show that someone who didn't smoke cigarettes and just smoked pot died of lung cancer or respiratory disease. Never happens. And you know, I've also looked, you know, when I take a hit out of my bong, that's filthy water there. And I must have taken 10 or 20,000 hits of that bong, plus innumerable joints. You know, and I'm thinking, well, there should be like 40, 50 pounds of carbon inside me. But there isn't. There isn't. So obviously the body's able even to break down and digest pot byproducts, because no one, I swear, if there was one guy who had cancer from smoking pot, and by the way, Bob Marley did have cancer, but in his toe, probably the only area he didn't put pot, okay, and if anybody had ever died of lung cancer, the government would have a post and say, this could be you. If there was just one, but there isn't. You know, and you know what you also never find? You never find a single court record where any violent act was initiated by someone smoking pot by themselves. You had alcohol. Almost everything is plus alcohol, and it's going to be either a poisoning, a death, a gang killing, or, you know,